eradication of poverty and hunger, strategies to improve food security and reduce vulnerability in Latin America and the Caribbean. The 8 Millennium Goals set the course for efforts to provide basic human needs for proper nutrition, health, education, shelter, and security. Poverty and hunger often exist where these are not met. This discussion is going to focus on MDG1, which is to eradicate extreme hunger and poverty, and it reflects the fact that except we address this, we are not going to be able to deal with all the other MDGs. So some of the key issues with respect to hunger and poverty will be highlighted, and with some reference and so on to the political plight of women. Now the key challenges which are being faced is the high population growth in developing countries, the global food insecurity, the rapidly aging population, and the predominance of youth. And there's also the issue that the population is becoming a lot more concerned about the environment. The population are more into contemporary communication tools. They're more demanding about what it is they want to consume. So there's increased dynamic urbanization, there's the coexistence of undernourishment as well as the chronic non-communicable diseases. Certainly within the Caribbean, we moved from protein, energy, malnutrition way back in the 50s and 60s to now where we are basically somewhat obese. So there's increasing demand for food, there's increased international trade, our taste patterns are shifting as we become more and more influenced by television and Facebook and the like. Women and youth continue to be exceedingly vulnerable, and there is increased pressure on natural resources. The demand for food, feed, and fuel, and energy and other outputs is higher, notwithstanding on some of the reduced resources to be able to produce these. Climate change, the climate has changed, the climate will continue to change, and the climate basically will force us to change if we are to address the issues of poverty and hunger. All that means and so on that there's severe food insecurity. Limited progress has been made within the agricultural sector as it relates and so on to gender and including gender in our socially inclusive approaches. And there are these gaps and so on because of prevailing traditions and cultural biases, and even adoption and implementation of agreed policies and conventions. Gender-related data and so on is not as available in this arena as we would like, and gender blindness in policy as well as technology development is rather evident. Now, FAO's mission and so on is a world free of hunger and malnutrition, where food and agriculture contributes to improving the living standards of all, especially the poorest, in an economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable manner. Its mandate is reduction of the absolute number of persons and so on suffering from hunger, the elimination of poverty and the driving forward economic and social progress, increased food production and enhanced development and sustainable livelihoods, as well as sustainable management of the environment. Our key areas of operation are sustainable identification of food production, addressing issues of food safety, looking at management of natural resources, enabling an environment for markets to improve livelihoods, improve food security and better nutrition, gender equity and access and so on to resources, goods and services, and increasing more efficient public and private investments in the sector. Our core functions include monitoring and assessment of long-term and medium-term trends, assembly and provision of information and knowledge, technical support to promote technology transfer, advocacy, interdisciplinary innovation, and partnerships and alliances. We anticipate that as a consequence of actions of all the people in the world, that we will have the number of persons whose income is less than $1 a day, and that we will achieve full and productive employment and decent work for all, including women and young people, and have the proportion of people who suffer from hunger. So, in this sense, food security means where all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy lifestyle. Food sovereignty, on the other hand, emphasizes access to food as a right legally protected and includes aspects of sustainability. Food sovereignty is defined as the people's right to define their own policies and strategies for sustainable production, distribution, and consumption of food. That guarantees the right to food for the entire population on the basis of small and medium-sized production, respecting their own cultures and the diversity of peasant, fishing, and indigenous forms of agricultural production, marketing, and management of rural areas, in which women play a fundamental role. The poverty and hunger trap is self-evident. We have 1.4 billion people who are poor. Poverty is often the root cause of hunger. Poor households spend a large share of their income on food. When incomes are reduced, hunger becomes a great threat. 1,800 calories per day of safe and nutritious food is required per person. Chronic hunger and malnutrition negatively impact health, education, and income, and the hunger-poverty nexus is a trap from which hungry and poor people find it difficult to escape. In other words, the hungry man can easily become a very angry man. Globally, women bear a disproportionate burden of poverty. 70% of the world's poor and hungry are women. Poverty is a major barrier to education and health for women. More informal and invisible employment and increasingly women are heading households, and consequently they are more vulnerable due to economic shocks, unemployment, and resulting poverty and hunger. Now, with respect to MDG1, we have to note that 43% of agricultural workers are women. Women play a major role in food security. They are laborers, they are producers, they contribute to livelihood. They have, however, limited access and so on to the production tools, land, credit, technology, and services. And this is a consequence of the social construct in many countries. With increasing earnings, studies show women are more likely to spend on the household, food, and education. And hence, we need to move towards empowering women so that we can cater to the future. Hence, the status of their poverty and hunger will have a great impact on the well-being of families. Any efforts to reach MDG1 must address the issue of how we develop and empower women. Food first, because the eradication of poverty and hunger is key to achieving all the Millennium Development Goals. Within Latin America and the Caribbean, agriculture is still an important sector for food, foreign exchange, livelihoods, and economic growth. Though we have the highest GDP per capita amongst developing countries, there are still issues of poverty. Because we are marked by uneven economic progress as it relates to the reduction in hunger and poverty. A key factor underlying food security is the high income inequality. More urban than other developing countries, but agriculture and rural development still has a key role to play in alleviating hunger and helping to provide environmental services so that we can have a sustainable environment. The Caribbean sub-region is in transition from primary agricultural services, sugarcane, banana, and rice, to where some countries are struggling with unemployment and poverty. Poverty levels range from 9% in Bahamas to rates of 76.5% in Suriname. Trinidad and Tobago is the fastest growing economy in Latin American Caribbean and has a per capita income of 19,000 US dollars, which is some 70 below. There's still some 17% of the population which are below the poverty line. The Caribbean Food and Nutrition Institute studies show that Caribbean poverty is where we are unable to provide a basket of 2,400 calories per day. The global definition of incomes of $1 per day or less is really too low to measure the extent of poverty within this region. There are persons who are earning much more than $1 per day who are still exceedingly poor. Women in Latin American Caribbean close the gap in education and made significant advances in employment. However, disparities between men and women still exist. Female-headed households are more likely poor, and 40 to 70% of the households are headed by females, depending on which Caribbean state you go to. Female poverty is also linked to the types of employment as well as the household disparities in the distribution of food. Women still carry a very heavy and disproportionate workload and ongoing struggle for balance. Higher incidence of obesity is also observed amongst the female population. Female farmers have more difficulty marketing products, accessing resources, goods and services than their male counterparts. The availability of sex disaggregated data is particularly lacking and very difficult to measure the true state of gender and development. Poverty, gender issues are complex. Many dimensions and linkages exist. For example, education, social relations, culture, religion, as well as the legislative and policy framework. There's a need to critically examine the conceptual framework of gender and poverty to facilitate empowering women. Now, agriculture underpins food security, but we are challenged by small sizes economies of scale, very, very open economies. We are vulnerable to natural disasters and climate change. We have limited international competitiveness because invariably our economies and so on are predicated upon energy or tourism, and you have relatively high incomes in those respective areas, and as a consequence, the availability of resources for the agriculture sector and so on is not as what we would like, but it then reflects on a fairly high levels of income, which helps drive down our competitiveness. In recent times, we've lost the preferential markets we had for sugar and banana, and we've seen, for example, here in Trinidad, the closure of the sugarcane industry, similarly with respect in St. Kitts, and we've seen diversification, attempts to diversify the sugarcane industry in Jamaica as well as in Barbados. The rules-based approach to agricultural policy, because we're all party to the World Trade Organization and the attending instruments, and therefore we have to be in a position to compete with the developed countries such as Europe and the United States, as well as the large developing countries such as Brazil and China. We expect to be at the same table and to be able to compete with these. And we can only do so if we are provided a certain degree of space, and if we are provided with the opportunity to be able to develop certain niche markets. But certainly in terms of the base food production items, grain, fruit, vegetables, we will not be in a position to compete with the United States and Brazil. So we're seeing a dramatic increase in food imports. We're seeing the CARICOM bill is down to an extent of $4 billion. We're also seeing an increase in food inflation. We're seeing over the last 4 years where the inflation in food is in the order of 134%, and therefore it is probable that increasing proportions of persons will fall below the poverty line. Now, the governments recognize that the high prices are not sustainable. The issue becomes what it is they can do about it, given that most of the food is imported. Hence the reason and so on that they need to shift towards looking at food production opportunities, food production and processing opportunities within CARICOM, utilizing the revised Treaty of Shagaramas as a framework for assisting and alleviating the food security concerns within the region. Then there's a rise in chronic non-communicable diseases, which is itself is impacting upon the productivity, because we're seeing falling productivity rates within all the Caribbean states. This is partially associated, I think, with the rising levels of chronic non-communicable diseases. And whilst at the same time, we're also seeing as a consequence of this scourge an increase in the health care bill, which the respective governments and so on have to meet in order to be able to address these issues. And what is of particular concern is that there's far greater manifestation amongst women than men as it relates to this particular topic. So not only do they have to carry the burden of assisting their productive function, their household functions, and their farming functions, but then it is compounded by the chronic non-communicable diseases. So, at the same time, we are encouraged by the fact that the governments are seeing it necessary to shift from a food security construct to that of food sovereignty. Because many of the CARICOM governments and things, when you look at the FAO definition, one may argue that they are food secure. Because by dint of the levels of income, per capita income, by dint of the growth that is obtained from energy and tourism, they're able to import food. And food is probably the biggest, food and energy are probably the two biggest imports within the Caribbean. But we're still seeing people's inability to be able to get access and so on to the food of their choice when they want it. So they're shifting towards the issue of the food sovereignty, which really means that we'll be far more in charge of our own destiny in order to be able to address our food needs and therefore reduce the dependence on imports. This is going to need a revision in our trade policy because our trade policy is dominated by free access and so on to licenses, the importers to import whatever they want once they meet certain sanitary and phytosanitary provisions. But this at the same time is to the detriment of the local farming community, and particularly our women who are struggling disproportionately so to access markets. The Food and Agriculture Organization attempt to address this matter speaks to several mechanisms, and which is being implemented in collaboration with the various domestic and international partners. Now, one such measure is Initiative for Hunger-Free Latin America and the Caribbean. This is a joint effort between the public sector, the private sector, and the non-government community to recognize the right for food by all citizens, understand that it's less costly to eliminate hunger than to coexist with it, and to link with several programs, technical assistance, social cooperation, research, and food and nutrition security to help chart our own way. Project areas such as school feeding program, small-scale farming, family farming, and strengthening support both in normative production as well as in emergency is part of what it is we're trying to achieve in hunger-free Latin America and the Caribbean. And that has adopted also a gender-based approach to ensure that the political needs of women are recognized and addressed. So there's a comprehensive action framework to managing the food crisis. There's been short-term assistance which is provided by FAO to respective member states in terms of support with materials, planting materials, fertilizers, etc., as well as stuff to support the fishing community. And then the medium-term efforts would be to provide technical support to smallholder-led food projects. Now there's also the initiative in family agriculture, which is to promote families, which would see the accentuation of the role and function of the female, given the large number of female-headed households at the level of the farm. This has the potential to enhance culture, support families within community setting, and create centers of economic development in a rural setting. Because family agriculture, or small-scale agriculture, accounts for more than 80% of agricultural production in the region, and provides 57 to 70% of the agricultural employment as source of income for the poor. The Caribbean Food Security Project which the principal activity of this was to use the value chain approach to address the issues from farm to table and to look at the opportunities beyond primary production. Because when you consider that most of our food is imported, and most of the imported food is processed, if we only focus on primary production, we will still not be addressing 90% of the food consumption patterns that exist. So therefore, we're talking about using a value chain approach where the Caribbean farmer and agro-processor would combine to utilize their respective resources in order to provide a greater number of food opportunities for the population within the region. So, and as a consequence, over 2,500 persons across the region have been trained in areas of crop, livestock, fisheries, forestry, and sustainable management, and the community-based food nutrition programs have also been mounted to ensure that we address this issue. We've also assisted the CARICOM governments in preparing a regional policy for food and nutrition security, and when that was presented to the minister says, fine, excellent job, but we want that to be evolved into national food and nutrition security plans as well as action initiatives. And we're in the process of implementing such a program across the region. And we've actually started work in Barbados, Jamaica, and Grenada. Trinidad activities will unfold as we have discussions with the ministry and the local ministry. And we will continue to work assiduously to assist addressing issues of disaster risk management. When the ministers of agriculture met recently at the regional FAO conference, they agreed that their priorities for the region would be addressing food and nutrition security within a gender context, addressing climate change, addressing issues of transboundary diseases, utilizing the value chain approach to assist in accelerating food production and food processing and consumption. Trinidad and Tobago's initiatives are welcome towards reducing the food import bill and to encourage increasing production through gardeners and the organization of agriculture. More recently, the Trinidad and Tobago government launched a national food production drive, which the Food and Agriculture Organization is assisting, and the whole idea is to promote healthy eating and to use it as a mechanism to manage the high food prices. So, we need greater agricultural productivity, sustainable natural resource management, food and nutrition security on a platform of food sovereignty, increased disaster risk management, creating employment, addressing high food prices, and we must close the gender gap if we expect to address the issues of food and nutrition security. We have to do that by addressing the inherent structural, social, cultural, and political issues as it relates to gender and its relationship to nutrition. We have to do that through value chains. Thank you very much.